You are on ABC Queensland and on the ABC Listen app. I'm enjoying some of the suggestions that are coming through on the text line about what you would do if you were Premier for today. If you woke up this morning and you all of a sudden had that responsibility, Lucky Phil says, I'd mandate that all politicians carry out fraud and ethics training and be tested on their comprehension of the subjects. Thank you, Phil. Andy from Oakey says, I'd give all truckies double pay. I don't know if that's the Premier's decision, but why not? And Trudy says she would show some compassion to disengaged youth. Early intervention works for families and children. Study the evidence and programs already in place, and most of all enshrine reproductive rights in stone. Thank you very much for your messages this morning. You can still text me as well if you'd like to tell me what you'd do as Premier for today. And there has been a lot of political talk in recent weeks, months, years. I wonder if you're feeling a little bit of information overload. It's been a few big weeks, and especially lately with all of the state election talk, a lot of information flying around. So how do you overcome information overload? Psychology consultant Dr. Jo Lukens is with me. Good morning.
Good morning, Susan.
So how does election outcomes in particular affect our happiness differently when maybe the candidate we were hoping to win doesn't win? How do we overcome that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really interesting about humans, and I think how we approach election scenarios is very similar to what we see right across our lives, is that interestingly, if, your local candidate or, the party, whatever it is, political views aside, but if they get up, then it tends to boost your happiness. That makes sense, doesn't it? That you'd be happy that your candidate or your party gets up. And so it tends to increase your happiness. It tends to do it for, not for a really long period of time, but we definitely notice an increase in people's levels of happiness in that kind of scenario. But if your party doesn't win, then the sadness that sits with you tends to sit with you for much longer than the happiness for someone whose party did get up. And we know that about people. We know that when things go well for us, we almost acclimatise to it very quickly, and then we go, this is the norm now and this is what it is. Whereas when things aren't going so well, it tends to sit with us for that little bit longer.
Yeah, and particularly if people are putting a lot of weight in how they've made their decision, because a lot of people will sit down and think, what are my values? What do I think is important? This is how I'm going to vote. And then I guess they'll feel that impact heavily on their values if their candidate or party isn't voted
successful.
in.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously politicians dictate a lot of really important parts of our lives. So we do vest much of ourselves in it. And the act of voting is a really conscious act that we have to physically go and do something about that. And so we step out and we stake our claim into what we want that to be. And then when the reality, if that's not what you want it to be, can be really hard for people. And I guess obviously in reverse, it's very validating for those that say, yes, this is what we wanted to have happen.
It's all very interesting. It's much deeper than just who will make decisions, isn't it? What are some sort of coping strategies that we might use for dealing with that electoral disappointment?
Yeah, so if it's disappointment for someone, sometimes what people will do is they will, when you watch the patterns of people in these kinds of scenarios, is they'll step back from politics. They want to disengage with it. And often what will happen is that they will sort of externalise the responses and so forth. So they might be a bit critical around their community and so forth. So we know that, and I guess what is useful for us, you were talking about information overload before, is it's like overload with any significant community event or world event, is it's controlling that saturation level of how much information you're taking in. By the time we get to the election, we're all a bit thankful. I think that blackout period
where there's no ads.
Where there's no ads and we go, there's a little bit of a break because we've heard so much of it. And I think that's one of the things that's important for us to remember in lots of scenarios, is that we do have a saturation point and we do need to look after ourselves with whichever way the results go.
And it's not just the Queensland election, there's also the American election, there was the ACT election a couple of weeks before, so there's just been a lot of politics around. It can make some tough times in interpersonal relationships though as well.
Oh, it can do, and particularly if those that we're close to hold different political views to us. And I guess in some ways that sort of sounds a little bit obvious, but we do get those differences in opinions. And as you said before, is that those differences in opinions come back often because of a difference in values, things that where we put importance on different scenarios. So sometimes expressing political views can really highlight the differences between people, and when it's people that are close to us, that can very much impact our relationships with them.
Yes. And with Christmas coming up, maybe best to avoid having those politics chats.
Yes, we do suggest, don't we? Often we talk about not talking about politics and holding political views, because being mindful that your view is not necessarily the view of all those around you, and so whether you want to advocate for those or not is obviously a personal decision.
Dr. Jo Lukin, psychology consultant and author, thank you so much for being with me today, and I'm sure we can all be a bit mind-wise this week as we decompress from all things election.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Thank
Susan.
you. Thanks so much for your time.